What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another week of Innovation by the Cup. We're serving up innovation one cup at a time. This week, we have Ike from Liberty Spark out in Lakenheath. We're just going to talk to him about how he set up his spark cell. He's still got a pretty young spark cell growing over there, but he's done a lot of things and learned a lot of lessons so far that we're going to talk about today. So, Ike, why don't you just do a quick introduction of who you are and what you're doing over there at Lakenheath?
First and foremost, Brad, thank you so much for having me today. I'm really excited about this. So a little bit of my background. Got into innovation about a year and a half ago. Started with the Continuous Process Improvement Office. Quickly saw how things were taking off. Have always been a big proponent of, can we do things faster? Can we do things in a better way that our civilian counterparts are doing, right? I see people in the public sector all the time doing these great things, and I can't believe how behind the times it seems that the Air Force is. So fast forward, quickly jumped into creating a spark cell. None existed in New Safety, where I currently am at RAF Lakenheath, the UK. And over the past year, we've been developing it, and now we've gone full time, and we're building up our office and building up the capabilities here at the Liberty Wing.
That's awesome. So you started out part-time and then you went full-time.
Sure did. Did part-time for about a year.
Yeah, I think that's where most of us start out, just the part-time thing, and then hope to get on full-time when it takes over. So with you going full-time now and kind of doing a little bit of reflection on what you've done, what do you think the two most important things you could have known starting out that would have made things easier?
That is a fantastic question. And I believe this goes with whatever you're doing, right? Whether you're starting a spark cell, starting a new business, whatever the case may be, is understand what the current culture is. Like that was the first thing that it took us a while. Like the group of people I was with, it's like just understanding exactly what innovation was, not maybe just in the Air Force, but just there at RAF Lakenheath at the Liberty Wing, right? What does the innovation culture look like? What do people think of innovation? Is it a buzzword? How would they define it? And we quickly discovered that it was just all over the place. It's almost like we had a team effort going on, like we were playing a game, but nobody knew their positions and nobody knew what anyone was doing. I literally kept telling leadership, I was like, you got so many things going on, but there's nobody, there's no quarterback. There's no one piloting the ship. And I was like, we got to get somebody, we got to get a team in here just to kind of align these different efforts and to make sure that these airmen have what they need to solve their problems.
So how did you guys solve that? How did you get everybody on the same page?
Oof. A lot of research. I hate to say this, but that was one of the saving graces of that initial lockdown of COVID-19, is you have a lot of time on your hands, right? So remote worked. I wound up knocking out my primary duties. I did about 6 months of work in about 2.5 months, hammering it out. And then I spent the rest of the time looking at what innovation efforts have been going on at my wing for about 2 years. So I worked with the wing process manager. We were reviewing quad charts, reviewing what the ROI had been. I mean, lucky for us, a lot of this data was out there. It just needed to be compiled, and it needed to be put into a way that wing leadership could look at it and be like, oh, there's actually a trend here. It's like we put this much effort in, and this is how much effort's come out of it. This is the results that come out of it, right? Because if you think about it, innovation, at least for us here, innovation results in two things. Is it saving airmen time, and is it reducing costs, which will inherently increase efficiency, right? So once you started showing those numbers and we started showing those efforts, it was pretty clear. It's like, wow, we really need to get a team in here to helm this ship.
So it sounds like you guys created metrics for tracking your innovation efforts.
We sure did. So we took the last 2 years of data and compiled it into a very intuitive dashboard. We literally just used Microsoft Power BI, and we just created a dashboard where the commanders could just see like, hey, these are like the categories that your airmen are kind of relating to within innovation, right? Luckily, the number one category was aviation. Second was like emergency response. Third was physical fitness and so forth, right? So it's exactly what any leader needs. They need to know what the health of their wing is. And we were able to provide that. And that's really what garnered the support of starting that full-time office and getting that spark cell stood up.
Yeah, so this is very interesting. So where did you go and how did you start tracking down those metrics and those areas you needed to track? Where did you start looking?
Research, research, research. So my very first stop was understanding who had been in charge of innovation, which fortunately for us was our wing process manager. It seemed like the CPI office, continuous process improvement, they had been running the show for several years. So they were like my first stop. So I got with them, combed through the data, and then I started hitting up the resource advisors because they are the ones that know where the money goes. So all the innovation funding that had come through, I got with the budget office, I got with the RAs, trying to find out like, hey, you guys have had these innovation efforts funded, but what was the results of it? And kind of quickly kind of understood it's like, oh, okay, so yeah, no one knew that you needed to actually kind of report on some of this data, kind of tell some of these stories of what the funds are doing for your people. Yeah, that's where we started out.
That's cool. Yeah, so it's good. I mean, metrics are so good to have because it helps back up the innovation stuff you're doing and helps you find where you're spending the money appropriately, which is really good.
It's almost like that market research you need to do when you're doing an investment pitch.
Exactly. But now you do it later on, and then you can see where you're doing your investments for your innovation efforts, as well as see where you need to spend more money up front. So, that's interesting. So would you say that was kind of another one of the most important things you learned was to develop out those metrics?
Yes. And I think that actually goes into your question too. It's like, what was something like to learn starting out Spark Cell? Of course, it was one, understanding kind of the background, understanding your foundation. But once we had that data, once we had those metrics, once we had the ear of wing leadership, it's like, all right, now we have to ask ourselves, what are we going to do with this information? Like you can see where we're at. We have our baseline, but what's our goal going to be? What's our benchmarks going to be? How are we going to get after this for the future? And that's where it really comes in understanding kind of like what kind of Spark Cell are you going to be? That was something I didn't think about like initially, right? Also kind of in the weeds about the data. I was like, oh, I have to figure out like what me and my team, what are we going after? I didn't even know there were different types of Spark Cells. Thankfully, Cap enlightened me on that.
Nice. Yeah, there's a lot of team network out there that can help kind of guide you, and it's good to kind of go and talk with other folks. And that's the greatest thing about this network is that we can all talk and go from there. So what would you think is your biggest lessons learned so far?
Oh gosh, this is a conversation we've had in private several times. Biggest lesson learned is have a plan. If you don't have a plan, develop a plan. Take some time.
So expand on that. Plan for what?
Perfect. So you have all this data, right? You want to start a Spark Cell. You're all into this innovation effort. But what are you going to do with it, right? So for us, for instance, like we had a team, everybody's volunteer, but we have no idea what Spark Cells do. And we're doing the networking piece. We're engaging with AFWorks, we're engaging with Wings. I engage with both you and Chris. And quickly we figured out, it's like, okay, so we need to have some actual goals for this year, what we're getting after, right? So we knew we wanted to develop an innovation lab, a place where airmen can actually come to learn, about future technology or just technology that exists in the world, but they just don't have quick access to. That was one of our goals. And the second goal was to build that networking piece, not just with the US side, but also try to build that networking piece with the local area. I mean, how it is right now, being overseas, we don't necessarily have that quick turnaround of all of our US government, entities and contractors and so forth, right? So who do we have locally we can engage with? And, luckily that was a very easy thing for me because, we're 30 minutes from Cambridge and there's actually a conglomeration in Cambridge called the Cambridge Network. And they're basically like a tech startup networking agency. So quickly kind of getting embedded in them and just kind of seeing like what are the different innovation efforts going on in the UK so we can kind of try to merge some of our efforts.
Nice. So you went out and found a bunch of different resources.
Found a bunch of different resources and built that plan. Kind of like building out what your pillars are and trying to align that with what your Wings efforts are.
Yeah. So when you were building out your plan, you found a bunch of resources. And did you include them in your plan?
Sure did. So for example, right? So one of our things is community. So with the 48th Fighter Wing, we have readiness, we have F-35, and then we have community, right? So how do we support community? We support community through networking. And that's one of my primary mission goals for my commander is, okay, we need to improve that host nation relationship between the US and the UK on the innovation side. So how can we start bringing in some of these like technology firms and these startup companies in the UK? How can we start working with them to develop solutions for the warfighter?
Mm-hmm. That's awesome. I think when I was starting up the Spark Cell at Scott, my biggest lessons learned was getting that buy-in early. We didn't have a lot of that early for us. We had a plan. We didn't have all the metrics right up front, but we definitely didn't have the buy-in that we needed. What about you, Chris? What did you guys have? What lessons learned do you think for you guys?
Yeah, so kind of in line with what you and I were talking about, it's getting the people. We had top level buy-in. I mean, the wing commander, said, "Hey, here's a bunch of end of year funds. Build us a Spark Cell. Build us an innovation center." So we did that. That was step one, and you can see the result of it behind me. But step two was, okay, why are we building it? We didn't really understand why we were building it. I mean, we had the plan to build it, and we had an idea of what the innovation culture was like. But we didn't really have the plan on where to find the people. I mean, we knew they would come, kind of like Kevin Costner's movie, Build It, when he says, build it and they will come. And they did, but it took a little doing. So when you're talking marketing and advertising, that's what we really had to focus on. So yeah, lesson learned was get buy-in, not only from the top leadership, but, across the spectrum.
Yeah, we had to get it from across the spectrum too. So, you want to talk a little bit about resources, Chris?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, there's tons of different resources. And I like the fact that Ike was talking about the Cambridge group. Looks like he's frozen right now, but I'm not sure. The Cambridge group. So we have some of those same types of organizations within the state of Maryland. And every Spark Cell, wherever you are, should have something similar, whether it's the Economic Development Corporation within your local community or your state, or something that has to do with innovation and technology. We're seeing a widespread increase across the United States with looking at innovation just because of all the different things that we need to do. So yeah, resources abound. You just have to know where to look for them. And if you have issues or whatever, don't hesitate to reach out to myself or Brad or anybody else that's in the Spark world, because we can help.
Yeah. So what about you, Ike? What are those most useful resources you found?
So most useful resources to me are going to fall into two categories: internal, external, right? So your internal ecosystem is exactly what y'all talked about. It's leadership buy-in, top tier, mid tier, and even right there, boots on the ground, right? So it's one thing to get your wing commanders buy-in, but like if you need to get like your unit commanders and organizational ones, just get with your wing commander. It's like, hey, listen, I need to start meeting with the group commanders. I need to start meeting at the finance management board. Can I have some time at the wing staff meeting? Can I start just having these little workshops just to talk about what are the problems that individuals are facing within the units? That's one way with the internal, right? Mm-hmm. Getting there with like public affairs, FSS, sky's the limit. External is a whole different game. And that's where getting with like AFWorks, getting with your other Spark cells within the network. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, there's like, is it 80, 85 plus Spark cells
around like right now? That's close, yeah.
Yeah. So just reaching out to see, what are some best practices? What are some efforts that people are working on? Because if you have something that you're working on in your backyard, that same recipe may apply to a brand new Spark cell. Like Chris, you actually helped me out with a project on VR driving. You hooked me up with a company here in the UK, and now they're developing us a VR simulator take-home kit for newcomers. That way, when they come over here, they can. You don't have to do trial by fire when you have to learn how to drive these UK roads.
Yeah. No kidding.
The magic roundabout.
Awesome. What do you say, Chris?
The magic roundabout.
Yeah, it's awesome, the network. That's the biggest thing about the innovation is that network. You can get anything done with a network or at least get started down the right path. You just got to reach out. So for all y'all listening, the network is huge, right? And you talk about having a plan, you talk about the metrics, some of those things too, but that network is huge. But always look at your metrics. Always have a plan when you start out. Try to find your why of why you're building out your Spark cell. So thanks for joining us this week.
Yep.
It's Innovation by the Cup, and continue innovating one cup at a time.